All right, it's connecting now. Popping out the YouTube chat, saying hello. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another episode of SEO Fight Club. We have a shorter one, which I know that Kyle will appreciate because he likes the shorter episodes. I know a lot of our viewers prefer the longer episodes, and if we went for 2 hours, that would be just fine. But today, it's kind of a shorter one. So, with that, let's get through the boilerplate. We don't have Clint at the moment, so maybe we'll jump back when he's here. If you haven't seen his YouTube show, it's pretty cool. Just search for it in YouTube. Search for SEO this week. It'll be result number 1 in YouTube. Another great show that we recommend is the SEO video show. So check it out. It's an interview show where he interviews all the personalities in the SEO industry. So check it out. The production quality of his show is fantastic. So be sure to check it out. And then there is a podcast that's kind of new called Confessions of an SEO. And I really like this podcast because it's not about like tactical tips. It's more about the human story of SEO. So the issues and trying to relate SEO back to the business or back to the situations that occur in the industry. I kind of view this podcast as Radio Lab, but for SEO. So if you like Radio Lab and you like SEO, you're probably going to like this podcast. So be sure to check it out. I think it's awesome. And then we don't have Lauren here today, so I'll try to get through some of this. I'll probably need Kyle's help for some of it. But there's an upcoming course, Optimize Your Life, Health, and Wellness with Matt Diggity. So, Kyle, this one is outside of the norm. How does this fit into SEO?
I'm excited about this one. So what we're doing here, so this is the first and hopefully a long running series of kind of mini courses where we look at very high performing, very successful SEOs, and then the things that they're doing that are outside of SEO that help them get that success and maintain that success. And so the resident successful person for this one is Matt Diggity, and who's extremely successful in SEO, more on the affiliate side than say the client side. But he does a lot of biohacking, and we walk through kind of what he does to maintain his health. And the idea is, if you're healthy, you can maximize your output, maintain the level that you're at, and then excel. And it's like, well, what's he doing? So we're looking with this series, we're looking to talk to people that are crushing it. And then, what's a secret to your success? How are you getting there? And Matt attributes his health and wellness to his success. And so it's just a lot of fun. It's an interview style setup. We walk through the things that he's focused on. And obviously Matt's not a doctor, so people need to talk to a doctor before you do anything to your body. But it was a lot of fun to talk to him outside of the realm, because everybody just wants to talk to him about SEO and affiliate work, but what's he doing in his day to day? What's his life like? And he was very candid and very open about all the things that he's doing in terms of like the supplements, his sleep habits, stuff like that. It was really very cool to do.
Awesome. So it's kind of like a how do you do it? How do you handle the scale? How do you keep it going type of thing?
Well, exactly. I mean, you know the stress that we all are under. That when you're running these businesses and you're responsible for all kinds of things, and how do you like take care of yourself? How do you take care of your body so that you can continue to do what you're doing and stay at a a high performance level. How can you handle that? And Matt really opens up about what he's doing for his health, and it was really a lot of fun to talk to him about it, and it's I think it's pretty cool. It's the kind of thing that if you aren't taking care of yourself, you may want to watch this,
Yeah,
like to get some ideas.
we had a thread in the Facebook community, I think, where we kind of talked about, work being, too much. Like a lot of my past business partners from the .com era are deceased now because they were workaholics, and you can literally work yourself to death, especially if you're not careful. Like if you're drinking too much, you can find yourself without a liver in a hurry. And
Yeah.
this stuff is important. You can work too hard. So yeah, I'm interested to see what he has, because it's tricky trying to balance it all, especially if you end up traveling a lot for work and things like that.
Oh, it's easy.
um,
It's easy to destroy your body.
yeah,
that's,
yeah,
that's no problem
totally
at
is.
all.
So what about this next one? Link outreach that doesn't suck, by
Yes,
BBQ.
that was the course we launched this month. So for those that aren't familiar, in IMG and MRE, well, we launch about two courses a month, and covering a lot of different topics. So obviously, the health and wellness isn't directly SEO related, but we're kind of excited about that. But then also at the beginning of this month, BB the link builder, you've probably seen her on Facebook, walks through kind of her mindset on how she does outreach. That's what she does. She has a link building company, and outreach is what she does day in and day out. And it's a really cool course where she kind of walks. It's a mini course, so it's not completely comprehensive, but it's a great look at her mindset, how to do link outreach, um, as it says, that doesn't suck, but just like kind of how does a professional link builder think about link building? And there's so much you can get out of that to kind of raise your game. If you're like, how can we do this outreach, or what can I do, or what can I look for in a team? Even, let's say you're going to outsource your outreach. You could watch this course and then see how high level professionals doing it, so that that your team is doing it right, or maybe your provider isn't doing it right. You know what I mean?
Yep, makes sense. And then, of course, the Cora Stepping Up Your SEO Game by Clint Butler. That's not a new one, that's from the archives. But if you're looking for a Cora course and some next level SEO, there's that one. And it's a pretty good one. I'm also trying to convince Lee, who is testing a secret course, to see if it's doable. I want to try to convince him to bring his over to IMG too eventually. What do
Excellent.
you think about that idea, Lee? No comment from Lee.
Hold on. It's like, so it's something I'll definitely look at. There's no question about that. But we'll have to see how the course goes. Like I said, it's a beta. It's going to start in a couple of weeks. So I'm excited about it, and we've got a pretty good group signed up so far, and I'm just excited to see what people do with what I'm going to show them.
Nice. Well, maybe once you run the course with it, we'll discuss it, see how it went.
Sure, absolutely.
All right. And so let's see, we have the Friday featured member in IMG, where we give some information so you can meet someone new in the community and say hello and introduce yourself. If you want to be a part of that, just comment on one of the Friday featured member posts saying, hey, I'd like to do this too. So let us know. There's also the Monday YouTube show roundup, where we post a lot of the SEO shows that are happening outside of IMG. Make sure that you know about them. And there's the Ask the Expert Live with Kyle Roof. So that's a pretty exciting one. We had a pretty interesting debate on my last AMA that was yesterday. So that was interesting too. Got into kind of how we feel about Google's rules about links, and so it got a little heated. And then of course, next Wednesday brings us back to episode 116. So a pretty good lineup of things happening. All right, so back to our topic. So there was a Search Engine Roundtable article, and I kind of read it quickly, read it in a hurry, not sure that I read it the right way even. But there's something in the article that kind of had the feeling that John Mueller was saying something like Googlebot will visit pages it deems are more important more frequently. And so there's this notion that if Googlebot's coming back to a page a lot, that's an important page on your website. And he didn't exactly say that. I'm paraphrasing massively, and it's kind of just how I read it. But it was enough of a kick in the butt that I was like, oh, really? And pulled up my Apache weblogs and started running stats in Excel and said, let's take a look at Googlebot Visitation. So that is what we're talking about today. But before we do that, I see Clint just hopped in. So let me hop back to Clint's slide and give Clint a chance to say what's going on.
Oh, hey, how you doing, Ted?
Pretty good. How are you?
Oh, good. Just onboarding the client. So priorities, man, priorities.
Yeah, can't fault you there.
The show this week's actually, it was all right. 4 questions. And in particular, I went over how to use person schema to annotate your editors. And that's kind of valuable when you're talking about sites that are in Your Money, Your Life, in particular, Medic. So hopefully you guys enjoy that.
Very cool. So yeah, just if you want to check out that show, just search for SEO This Week in YouTube, and it should be result number 1. All right, so back to our topic. Just to paraphrase that for Clint, because he came in a little late. Google said that Googlebot tends to visit important pages more frequently. And I thought that was an interesting kind of thing. I'm paraphrasing here. They didn't exactly say that. But I found it interesting enough that I started pulling data and running stats to see what I could see. And that's what we're looking at today. So the data I pulled was pretty much like the document, the timestamp that Googlebot visited, the user agent, and the status code. So I'm looking at those 4 fields from the server logs. And so right away, this is the top of the count of Googlebot visits for each document on the server. Now, these documents, they span a number of different domains. And a lot of these things are things that are slated for retiring. So these are just old websites that have fulfilled their usefulness, and I plan on culling them anyway. And so you can see the number of visits, and these logs, the log files that I pulled these from, were from a 2-month period, so roughly 60 days. And you can see that the homepage here of the websites were visited almost 3,000 times. Like, Google loves the homepage. Like, just flat out, Googlebot is going to check that the most regularly. And then the next runner up is the robots.txt file, which, kind of made sense to me because Google has to be very compliant with this file. Otherwise, they get lots of very loud vocal complaints. So I'm not surprised that they're checking this about as often as they check the homepage. But the next several ones, these next few, really caught me off guard, because these are still pretty big numbers and they're all feeds. Like Googlebot loves your feeds and they're consuming them quite often. So they're visiting the feed, 600 times in a 2-month period. That's remarkable to me. That has me rethinking how I engage with Googlebot. And now I want to make sure that I'm engaging in a smart way using the feeds. And, feeds I've always been hot and cold with. Like I always like them for syndication and getting links out there and doing feed burner tricks and all of that stuff with them. But then I don't like feeds if you're worried about people duplicating your content and competing with syndicated copies of your content. So, one of the interesting things I think that you could do with a feed system is you could actually decouple it from your primary content. You could have a feed that's for indexing, and you could also have, just, what you're doing in terms of your content and navigation. So I'm wondering if there isn't some sort of, optimal SEO play regarding the feeds. So that's something I'm interested in looking into.
Is there a sitemap on this site?
No. And I also wondered if Googlebot might be looking for the sitemaps in the robots.txt file.
Yeah.
Because that would also make sense.
Yeah, didn't find it. So I was like, oh, okay, we'll go to the feed. And
Yep. But it's, I believe that Google would consume the sitemaps. What I'm just in a little bit of awe is how aggressively they look at the RSS feeds.
what I'm saying is maybe they went to that because they didn't see your sitemap.
Yeah, could be.
It could be like their backup.
And I'm not necessarily sure if that would be a Googlebot visit for a sitemap.txt file. I wonder how that works with them. Yeah, I'd have to test it more for the sitemap behaviors. But another interesting thing is the static resources that are kind of globally used. That's another, interesting quirk is how often they're pulled. And I'm guessing that that's an artifact of the cache expiration on Google's end. So Google is taking a page, putting it into the Google cache, and they probably give it their own expiration date. And when they're doing that, it's not just the HTML, because ultimately they want to render the full page and find out if your styles and scripts affect the content and things of that nature. So they're probably caching all of these extra assets too, and these numbers here probably reflect those cache expirations on Google's side when the homepage is visited. So you could probably do a ratio of, this to that to find out how many homepage visits get a new render. So I think it's probably something like that is happening. But that could have implications on your JavaScript affected SEO, because if Google is going to cache your JavaScript longer, that's not the same as an immediate change. Then you have to wait for Google's expiration in their cache to get any new content changes out of your JavaScript. So if that is happening on Google's end, that's another way that JavaScript related content could go sideways in SEO. Again, I don't know that for certain, but it really has me wondering these numbers. And then finally, we start getting into like actual documents. So there's the Corelight page. Here's some keyword related pages, how SEO works, SEO outsourcing, SEO help. But there's also these location keyword based pages, Lambs Grove, Iowa SEO. And when I looked through the data, what I massively saw was how much more Googlebot tended to like these location keyword combination pages over the keyword only pages. Like, even though these keyword only ones are doing pretty well and are near the top of the list, the bulk of the list of what Googlebot is visiting are these location keyword ones. So it looks like, there's something going on. Perhaps perhaps there's a lot of competition, like, SEO outsourcing. There's probably a lot of documents on that, or how SEO works, a lot of documents on that. And maybe, Google doesn't have to work too hard to find documents for those. But Lambs Grove, Iowa SEO, maybe Google's starving for good content for that longer tail term. And so it has me wondering if there isn't something in terms of, how much desire does Googlebot have to consume pages like these over pages like those? So Google might be overfed on these, but starving on those. So I'm just speculating that there might be something about that to how much Google wants to consume certain types of keyword content. What are your thoughts on that, Lee? I know you've looked at the two academically.
I think the local I find works a little bit differently than just your standard organic search, and so it's possible that there are two different algorithms that have as you said, different hunger for data. It also, when I look at some of these that you had, Lambs Grove, Iowa, Edison, Georgia, not the largest places in the world. So maybe there is, that is among the best content available for those keywords. I mean, it's kind of it's really, really hard with just, one site's thing to make any specific conclusions, but I'm with you on that. I think that could very well be it.
Yeah, so we're speculating. There's still a lot we don't know about, how Google behaves, but it's interesting to see some data. So again, I'm showing more of the data. So the next part of the list, and you can see location keyword, location keyword, location keyword, location keyword. Then we have just keyword only here. Location keyword, keyword only, location keyword, keyword only, location keyword, keyword only. Then as we get deeper, it becomes, more and more weighted towards location keyword pages. So we see a lot more in this page. So I thought that was an interesting trend, but by far the biggest takeaway from that first set of slides was the feeds, like just how much Google is looking at those feeds. I found that a little bit astonishing. So I looked at it by status code too. So all those pages, a bunch of them were Googlebot getting 200 OKs. Then there's a bunch of pages that I no longer host, largely test pages. They're gone, but Google's still trying to find them anyway. And that's a problem with Google, is if you go 404 on a page, Google will spend the next 10 months hoping the page comes back. So it can be a problem if you do it at scale. So, be mindful of what you 404. And if the problem gets too big, you either need to do redirects to satisfy Googlebot and then recanonicalize it, or maybe 410 to say, just give up on this URL. And then I manage a few redirects for old things I discontinued, but were still kind of important. Most of it is like previous versions of my website. So you do a web design change and all your URLs change. And now you're stuck managing these URLs forever, which is generally why you want to argue against doing web redesigns every 2 years, which a lot of businesses just love doing. These numbers will grow as you try to maintain all your legacy URL structures and keep all those backlinks pointed. Otherwise, if you do a web redesign and you just abandon all those as 404s, and you're orphaning a lot of backlinks, and that off-page SEO, that's kind of the hardest part to do, in my opinion. So you really don't want to be orphaning these if those are coming through as backlinks. What do you think, Clint?
Yeah, I agree. You don't want to try too hard. You can if you get to the point where you're talking about where you just have a ton of high numbers there, is kind of use the 404 page and send your link juice through that 404 page to your top level category pages. And that'll help you counter that.
That's
I've
a
seen some
good
sites with like 80,000 301 set up. It's just retarded. So at some point you got to do something else.
Yeah, that's an interesting notion that a soft 404 would pass link juice in the link graph. I don't think I've ever tested that. Have you tested that?
Not like how we test. I just done it and it seems to work. It's one of those kind of things that I'm trusting works.
Interesting. All right. Well, I'll make a mental note to try and test that officially. That's a cool idea. So then the next way I wanted to look at this data was by the date crawled to see if there was any patterns as to when Googlebot visits. And so we kind of have this kickoff of the July update, and over here in the data, we had a drop off right when that kick up happened. So on the 29th, it really kicked off. And then over here on the 29th, Googlebot visitation fell way down. And then it looked like over on the 2nd, it had some catch up to do. And I didn't notice this pattern right away. Lee was the one that was like, hey, those, we were just looking at this data, not the graph. And Lee was like, those 2 dates were an update. So Lee, what were your thoughts on this data?
Well, we always see, one of the things that we see in with the tests that we run is that things slow down. Movement, and keyword movement slows down. If you've got content out there, indexing slows down or dies right before an update happens. So, when I was scanning through there, looking at the highs and lows, I was like, hey, those things just, happen to match up. I knew the, June 30th was one of those dates that had a lot of Google activity. So, it just looks like this is another way of catching a potential update. And this looked like it happened, at least a day in advance, maybe 2, depending on how you define the update there.
Yeah, and so this is really interesting to me because it's potentially a new way to detect Google updates. So if you have a really stable website that you don't change very often, you can monitor it for Googlebot visitation drops and then catch up. And when you see spikes like that, you know that there's an event like this. And so that's kind of interesting that we have, another dimension of being able to detect update activity. So if you wanted to experiment in building your own update detection, Googlebot behavior might be a decent route. It looks really interesting because additionally, we have this 8th event here, and right before the 8th, there's a little bit of a drop off from the 3rd to the 5th. So 3rd to the 5th. Not sure how to read that one. But, there's definitely a spike happening on the 8th and activity happening on the 8th. So there may be an art to reading this kind of data.
Yeah, the other
But
thing interesting here, Ted, is it may be because this is all visits. Maybe, if this were broken down just homepage visits, maybe there's a cleaner uh, line break, in that data.
yeah, like if I limited it to my very stably ranking pages that I don't change hardly at all, yeah, I might get a better set of data to work with. So it's really compelling because I want to like modify our update detection tool and have a Googlebot activity line in here. I think that would be a really cool add to the system is Googlebot activity. So our IMG line, the light green one, this is kind of a propagation of data line. So we're seeing Google propagating things out to all of the servers with this line. Um, and it's been pegged. And so we know that Google's been busy because it's been pegged, but it's not the only indicator and it might not be the best indicator. So supplementing it with Googlebot activity would be awesome. And we've always talked about trying to figure out a way to detect when indexing is offline. Having some sort of event indicator for that would be cool too. But, who knows? We'll get there. We learn more every year. Kyle, what do you think about this data?
The crawl stuff I'm not too sure about. Something that I'm kind of interested in would be the day crawled, but previously on the where you can see the list that you're showing, I'd be interested to see how that lines up with Search Console and impressions. Like, does it kind of like if they're crawling it more, are those pages also showing for more keywords, or are they gaining more impressions?
Well,
That'd be an
it's
interesting thing.
yeah, it's actually quite interesting because like this Glasgow, Kentucky SEO page doesn't rank for its keyword. And other pages do, but this page doesn't yet. It's among some of the top visited pages in the past 2 months. So
Very
Googlebot's
interesting.
coming back to it regularly, but it's not ranking for its keyword. And
Is
so
it
there's
ranking for other things? Like, is it gaining impressions?
I didn't dig too deep, but I definitely need to go look deeper. But yeah, not all of these highest visited pages are the best performing pages in terms of SEO. They're
Huh.
just best performing in capturing Googlebot's attention. And so there is definitely a disconnect between how much attention a page gets and how well it ranks. So the claim from Google that if Googlebot is visiting your page, that means it's a very important page. I'm not so certain that's what it means.
It'd be interesting. Like for that. So like that, that Glasgow, Kentucky, which how much competition can there be for that term? But it'd be interesting to see that if maybe it's not ranking for that exact phrase, but maybe it's actually doing pretty well. It's ranking for a lot of keywords and it's getting a lot of impressions, even though maybe not perhaps for that exact term.
Yeah. And, like I said, I barely scratched the surface. I only looked at 4 columns of data and I
No, this is
didn't dig
really,
much
really
deeper.
interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, probably after this, I'll probably hear from other people who started digging into their Apache weblogs. Because when you filter those weblogs down to just the Googlebot entries, it becomes a pretty interesting data set. I'm very interested in what's going on there. And so it's a neat look at that behavior. And definitely if you're trying to get something indexed, homepage, we all knew, potentially the sitemaps and the robot.txt file, that's to be determined. And then feeds, your RSS feeds are being consumed by Googlebot. These are only here because Googlebot was consuming them.
So
And
Thane had a pretty interesting comment on that, saying that he thinks that feeds would be easier to read than rendering HTML and JavaScript.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So that'd be a sneaky way to index your like to make sure that you've got your feed on so you can index your pages to get Google to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And so there's, a possibility that you could definitely, kind of detach the feed from the website and engineer a feed management system that's all about the SEO.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so
For Ted, your site is just an HTML site, right?
yeah, everything I do is just static content.
When you set up
And
your feed, was there anything special that you had to do, or anything in particular that, because most people, they've say got a WordPress site and it's just doing that automatically, or maybe they've turned it off, but it's kind of an automated process of just having the site. Is there anything you did specifically for your site to enable this feed or anything like that?
yeah, there's a few domains I have that are WordPress, and that's where these are coming from.
Okay.
But they you can do these manually. You can set up the RSS file as just a text file. You have to look up the RSS format, and you just got to make sure that it validates. And as long as you adhere to that RSS format, you could just edit it in a text editor and upload it. And that's, it's very low tech in that regard. And XML is similar to HTML. So if you're comfortable working with HTML, it won't be too different. It's just a little more strict. But yeah, so that's our show.
Nice one.
Let me check for questions here. Jordan Pierce says it may just be a coincidence, but ever since I started hosting sites on Google Cloud, my pages and site gets crawled way more frequently than when I didn't. So, for a long time, there's been a lot of anecdotal claims that Google favors its own stack. And what do you think about that, Clint? I know you've tested that a lot.
Yeah, I think he's probably not wrong, because there's some more connections in there, and Google's definitely going to use they have access to that Google Cloud stuff right off the bat, right? So it just kind of makes sense that they're going to be scanning it anyway and looking at it anyway and doing what they do on the back end. So pushing that over to Googlebot, that makes sense to me. I can see how that happens. I haven't seen an increase from the other services, but definitely Google Cloud. I can see that.
And he asks, have you tested crawl frequency from menu links? And no, I haven't analyzed any of the actual like session click streams. And that would be a cool thing, is to look at Googlebot click streams in detail. And a click stream is the click by click link visitation Googlebot takes as it walks through a website. So when you get a full session of that, you see how Googlebot walks through a website. Normally, when it's a human being, you would see each individual click in the sequential order that they happen. Googlebot might be more complicated than that because it's a grid system. So there might be parallel requests, and the order of things may be more akin to what layer they were discovered on, and not necessarily like a human being would click. Let's see. And yeah, we got things. So yeah, that's our show for today. Hope got you all thinking about feeds and Googlebot visitation and checking those web server logs that we all ignore for months and years on end. There's actually some data in those that might be worthwhile. So any final thoughts?
Nope, I'm good.
No, good stuff. Good stuff.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We will see you next time.